we continue to endeavor to understand the nature of emptiness. But the question that's been arising out of the stories of the last weeks is, what is your relationship with life now? You know, Mola Nasruddin had many, many talents, and those talents manifested in different ways over the period of his life. But during one of these periods, the talent that arose had him go into the business of being an architect. And his prowess at being an architect, because being a mystic, of course, that brought other qualities to this talent, it came to the ears of the Sultan. So the Sultan had him design many palaces and build many palaces for him. But you know, Mola Nasruddin got tired of being an architect. So he went to the Sultan and he said, "I'm retiring." Well, the Sultan was reluctant to allow him to retire, but he beseeched the Mullah just to design and build one more palace. So Mola Nasruddin undertook this task, and he began it with the usual fervor and dedication that he'd put into all his other work. But after a month, the enthusiasm fizzled right out, and he started to do shoddy work. And because he wanted to get the job finished in a hurry and get it over and done with, he even used faulty materials because they were more available there than having them bought from other places. So after a year, the palace was built, and even though it was substandard and imperfect, it looked magnificent. So when the Sultan came along, he congratulated the Mullah on building such a beautiful edifice. And he said to the Mullah, "I have a surprise for you. As my parting gift to you, I give you this palace." A long time ago, in the great city of Lyon in France, there was a man called Barnabas. Now Barnabas would travel from town to town, and dressed in a faded and threadbare green suit, with a pair of green moccasins that curled up at the toes and had a bell dangling from the end, but stuffed with paper because the soles were so worn. When the sun was shining, he would lay out the carpet, old and worn like his clothing, that carried the accoutrements that he used to hold under his arm as he travelled. So he would lay out his carpet, and then he would recite the few words that his old teacher had taught him, word for word. And he would say this to the few children who curiously came around to see this strange fellow, and a few of the old beggars that were around the town squares. But then, when he stood on his head and he began to juggle the copper discs that he had, or he doubled over in a wheel and touched his head on his heels and began to juggle the 6 swords that he carried around in his old carpet. People would take notice. They would come, and a few coins would be thrown on his carpet. But you know, he could only juggle when the days were fine, because people didn't come into the squares when it was raining or when it was cold. So very often Barnabas, at the end of a day, had an empty belly and nowhere to rest, not even a few coins to buy a glass of warm wine to bring succor to his belly. In the winter time, of course, the days of hunger were long. He could not juggle on the icy grounds around the squares. One day, during a particularly long and hard winter when the snow was often on the ground, Barnabas was walking down a street, feeling the grumbling of his stomach, feeling the chill through the thin layer of his worn green suit, when it so happened that a priest in a long cassock was going the same way as he was walking. So they got into conversation. Now, Barnabas was not a religious man, but you could call him pious, because even though the days when he was hungry and the days when he had money to put food in his belly came and went, there was one thing that was always with him, and that was his love of Mother Mary. Whenever he came to a church, he would go in and he would kneel in front of the statue of the Virgin and give her his honor, a thread throughout his entire life. But in his conversation with the priest said, "Why are you wearing a green suit? Are you some kind of jester that's in some kind of play?" And Barnabas replied to him, "Oh, no, I'm a juggler, but the days of winter are long and I hardly have anything to eat. Would it be that there was something that I could have each day so that at least I could warm my innards?" But the priest chastised him and said, "Ah," he said, "what about the word of a priest? Every day we pray, we give our dedication, we give our honor to God." "Oh," said Barnabas, forgive me for my blasphemy. I too revere and honor the Virgin Mother." Now the priest could see the simple earnestness of Barnabas. So he said to him, "Why don't you come with me? Why don't you come back with me to the monastery? Join our order." Barnabas readily accepted and went with the priest, who, it so happened, was the prior of this monastery. And so he became one of the brothers. At first he was very content. There was the warm soup that he had. There was the opportunity to go to the chapel and pray each day, to see his beloved Virgin Mary, her statue, there at the side of the altar. But then Barnabas noticed, every day after the prayers in the chapel, the prior would go to his private room, and there he would write the wonderful interpretations of the Gospels. And then there was Father Philippe, who would take those writings and make beautiful calligraphy on pieces of hand-made paper. And then Father Mauritius would draw little cherubims and angels around the edges of the pages. And Father Michael, who carved beautiful images. And Barnabas grew sadder, more morose, and more depressed. He saw these brothers with their talents, with their abilities, and he had nothing. He felt like nothing. He became more and more sad, deeply, deeply depressed. Everyone noticed, but were helpless to help him. But then, suddenly, one morning, Barnabas woke up, jumped out of his bed with a big smile on his face. And after the prayers, like the prior, like Father Michael, like Father Mauritius, going off to their rooms, he went off to the chapel. And the fathers began to notice, and they wondered about it. But of course, you know, it was the prior's business to know everything that was going on in his monastery. So, with two of the old monks, he went to the chapel to see what Barnabas was doing. And when they opened the door, there was Barnabas in the front of the altar, standing on his head, juggling his copper discs, and then making a cartwheel to juggle his swords. The prior and the monks were affronted. How blasphemous is this? And all three of them were about to walk down and take Barnabas and chastise him, when all of a sudden a great light filled the chapel, and the Virgin Mary's statue descended down from the pedestal, and she took her blue robe and she wiped the sweat from Barnabas's brow. The prior and the two brothers fell down on their knees in awe and wonder. They quoted words from their Bible, which might come to mind for you as you hear this story. But the significance of the story is there without words for each and every one of us. And when we put these two simple stories together, they do allow us to find an answer to the question, what is our relationship with life now? What words would come to mind as that prior and the priest knelt down in awe and wonder, that is relevant to the answer that we would make to the question, what is our relationship with life now? What would be the words that arise out of your heart now? Where are we now when we find ourselves with nowhere else to be but right here and right now, with 100% presence, 100% focus, and 100% attention to the reality of life? But what is that that's manifest in our life, like the Mooler's talents that are present in relationship to that moment, that movement of life? What is it about you?
Words are something to do with the fact that we are all individual, and that we can be that what we are to the total extent that we are able to, and that's our perfection.
All right.